Question number 4, Willie Rennie.
I share the First Minister's concern about the recent outbreaks too. Infection rates in the west of Scotland are now higher than most of England and countries like Greece and Portugal, for which we have just imposed quarantine measures. I'm worried that we don't seem to be on top of this. First we locked down Aberdeen with citywide measures. Now we are restricting a whole region of almost 1 million people. So I wonder what we are not getting right. Test and Protect was supposed to drive the virus out before it spread. Why has this not happened in Aberdeen or Glasgow? Is it really up to the job?
First Minister.
Yes, it is, and I would encourage Willie Rennie to perhaps learn a little bit more about how Test and Protect operates, and also to understand, not just in Scotland, not just across the UK, but in every country, the importance of these systems. And I actually think Scotland has probably got one of the best systems anywhere, because it is built from the bottom up on our well-established health protection workforce, and the way it does that is not new, and we've scaled it up significantly. Test and Protect, if we hadn't Test and Protect, then we would not have been able to contain the outbreak in Aberdeen, and if we hadn't Test and Protect, we would not have been able to contain as effectively as it was the case the outbreak in the Two Sisters food processing plant in Cuparangus. It is because of Test and Protect that these outbreaks have not seeded wider and more widespread community transmission. Test and Protect, and I've said this right from the start, and I'm not the only one who says these things. It is not the first line of defence, and it cannot do all of this on its own. So Test and Protect is there when an outbreak starts to make sure it doesn't spread more widely, and is also there to give us crucial intelligence and data to know where to target additional actions. And that's why we've taken certain actions in Glasgow that we didn't take in Aberdeen, because the nature of the problem we're dealing with right now is not identical. But the first line of defence is all of us, and Scotland is not, it's not just that we're not unique here, we're in no way out of sync with what's happening right across Europe, where transmission is rising. Actually, in terms of our overall positivity rate, the numbers I've announced again today, positivity rate of around 1%, which is actually lower than you will find in many other countries right now, well below the 5% threshold that the WHO says is the sign of an outbreak being under control. But all of us have to play our part in keeping this under control, and when we don't stick to the rules, then we will see outbreaks and clusters happen, and then Test and Protect's job is to try to contain them. It's doing that job very well, and I target this last sentence to all of us, myself included. I think all of us have got to do our jobs maybe just a bit better, because we're all perhaps thinking it's over and not being as stringent, and I think it's a moment for all of us just to tighten up on how we are abiding by all of these really important rules.
Willie Rennie.
I'm sorry if the First Minister doesn't like me asking these questions, but it's important that opposition members challenge the government on its performance, and I am deeply worried we're not on top of the virus. If we're having to restrict the activities of almost 1 million people, I have a duty to ask what the government is doing, and I think the First Minister should accept that that is the case. It was reported that some of the infections may come from holidaymakers returning home with the virus. Last week I asked the Justice Secretary why the quarantine spot checks had lost almost 700 people. He didn't know the answer. So can the First Minister tell me, do we have this outbreak in the west of Scotland because those quarantine spot checks didn't work? And if not, why do we have the outbreak?
First Minister.
I don't mind anybody asking me questions. I've probably answered more questions. I've probably answered more questions on COVID over the past than any other leader anywhere, perhaps in the world. I have no objection to that. I just think there is a duty on all of us, not just government but opposition as well, to really make sure we understand how all of these things are working, so that we are giving the proper advice to the people across Scotland. And if we look across the UK right now, the kind of restrictions that are now in place in the west of Scotland have been in place for some weeks in the northwest of England. They have been in place in places like Manchester. You look across Europe right now, and there are many parts of Europe with even more stringent restrictions. It's actually because, and this is absolutely counterintuitive, It's because we're on top of this that we're acting preventatively and in an early intervention way to try to stop these outbreaks really running out of control. And it's Test and Protect that's giving us the information and the data to allow us to target this as effectively as we can. On quarantine, we have put in place, and these are arrangements that are in place across the UK, regulations for countries where we think there is a particular risk. Greece, we know from Test and Protect that a number of cases have come in from Greece, which is why we've actually acted earlier than other parts of the UK to place that country on the quarantine list. Public Health Scotland then does the job it has been tasked to do to make sure it is doing sample checks to ensure compliance. So these systems are working. We will always keep the operation and the efficacy of them under control. But I come back to a fundamental point here, that it is down to every single one of us to be abiding by all of these rules. And that applies whether you're coming back from a country overseas, it applies whether you're having people in your house, it applies when you're out and about and making sure you're following all of the rules. Government has got the lead responsibility here, but government can't do this on its own. All of us have to do the right things. And the good news is, if we all do the right things, then we can keep this virus under control. And while the numbers we are seeing right now, in common with many countries, are causing concern again, I come back to this point that we are still at a positivity rate, given the vastly increased numbers of tests that we are doing, of around 1%. And that should allow us to be vigilant, not to be complacent, but also to keep it in perspective.
Thank you. Question number 5.